Holy shike, let's talk about pigs. Here's your host of the Pork Podcast, Jennifer Shike.
How does one come to work for the CIA Counterterrorism Center, become a special agent with the FBI, and finally achieve her dream of becoming a teacher? And what in the world does this have to do with the pork industry? Well, I received an exclusive opportunity to talk about Tracy Walder's unconventional journey before her keynote address at the National Pork Industry Forum. Our conversation that I'm going to share with you today about her why not approach and relying on gut instincts to seize opportunities when they arise is one that I will never forget. I think we can all relate to her message that she shared at Forum. Now let's get into my inspiring conversation with Tracy Walder. Well, I am thrilled to welcome Tracy Walder, an American hero and inspiration to the Pork Podcast today. I have loved, I'm actually listening to your book, The Unexpected Spy, and just can't wait to share a little bit of your story with our listeners today. So I'll be the first to admit that, I can relate to a lot of the things that you start off and talk about. I grew up being quite the question asker myself. I think why was ingrained in my brain as early as I can remember. My parents were just so irritated with me sometimes because there always had to be like, why? And I grew up with a great storyteller of a grandma who always inspired me to think about things more deeply through the stories that she shared. So when I look back, I think it's easy for me to see how those things led to where I am today as an agricultural journalist, sharing stories of the industry that I'm so passionate about. So let's kind of start off with you, Tracy. What about you? What kind of a kid were you? And what was life like for you before you joined the CIA?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me, Jennifer. It's really a pleasure to be here, and I'm very excited to talk with you and share my story and answer your questions. So for me, starting out, I would say I was actually very much a bullied child. I was born with a developmental disability called hypotonia, which the kind of crude term for it is floppy baby syndrome. So I hit developmental milestones pretty late. Like I didn't walk until I was 3, didn't roll over until I was 2, just late. And so I think in the 70s, when I was born, there wasn't a lot known about it. I think my parents were just kind of like, you're not going to die. You'll be fine. Great. You'll just be slower in terms of how you develop. You won't be a sports enthusiast. And as a result, I was very, very clumsy. I don't have a lot of muscle tone on my legs. And people started bullying me in probably about 3rd grade. And I always say I'm so glad I'm old, and because we didn't have social media and cell phones at the time, because it would stop obviously once I went home. But unfortunately, it lasted all the way into 11th grade. And so that's a big kind of formative years, I guess, if you will. So I actually became pretty introverted, pretty shy, not super trusting of a lot of people. But my parents were obviously very supportive of me. My dad was a college professor. And so growing up, much to my chagrin, sometimes we didn't get presents, for the holidays or birthdays. My parents would save their money and take us on trips. But the one place we couldn't go was the Middle East. And I think when you're a kid, you're like, okay, well, that's where I want to go because you sort of want to be, I don't know, a rebel. And I think it just was always in the back of my mind about this area. But I wanted to be a high school history teacher. That's what I thought I was going to be. I had a very influential teacher my junior year of high school, and I just wanted to be just like him. And so I went to college where my dad was a professor because I got free tuition. So why not? And I majored in history with the intention of being a high school history teacher. This is the 90s. So at this time, we didn't have a lot of exposure that I think kids these days do to the CIA, to the FBI, and just in terms of pop culture. There's just so many shows today that we didn't have at all in the 90s. And so I did not even know that was a career path. I don't even really think I knew what Al-Qaeda was. I grew up in the days of, the Oklahoma City bombing. That was my, I guess, compass or barometer of terrorism. But I was watching TV while I was working out, and it's 1997, and it was Osama bin Laden was on the TV, and it was in that interview he issued his declaration of war against the United States. And so I started, I guess, asking questions like, who is this person? What is he about? But at the college I went to at the time, and this was pretty normal. There weren't counterterrorism classes that you could take. So I started to take, international affairs, introduction to the Middle East, those kinds of classes to still fulfill my history major, but obviously get out in the 4 years with a free tuition. And so again, I don't think I knew that there was a career that was readily available working this counterterrorism thing until I went to a career fair on our main thoroughfare at campus, and the CIA was there recruiting, which they do on a lot of college campuses. And I went up to them and asked them if they did counterterrorism, and they said yes, but it was a small group. And so I actually gave them my resume, not really expecting anyone to call, and they called, and I guess the rest is history.
Oh, it's a cool story. And kudos for career fairs, right? Like exposing young people to opportunities that they didn't even know existed. That's so neat. One of the things that you mentioned in one of your TED Talks that really stood out to me is, why do we have to have a reason for the path we choose in life? Sometimes a goal just seems right to achieve. Sometimes we get so caught up in answering why that an opportunity passes us by. So explain what you mean by that. Tell us a little bit more about what happened next.
Well, I think a lot of times, if we veer from whatever path we thought we wanted, right? Mine was obviously being a high school history teacher. People get a little jarred by that. I don't know any other way to say that. And so as a result, they turn to, well, why would you want to do that? Especially at the time. So we have to remember the time, right? Again, people were not really actively pursuing careers in these fields because it wasn't in front of our face, I guess, like it is today with shows like Homeland, Criminal Minds, all the things. And so instead of people asking the question how, which I actually think is a better question and a more important question, a lot of people were, and I don't think it was coming from a place of intentionally being mean, but it was sort of that, why would you want to do that? That's so weird. Why? You were supposed to want to do this. Well, it's not to say I don't want to do that ever, but maybe this will make me ultimately a better teacher. Maybe taking this path will be a little bit of a detour, or maybe it's something I'm going to do for the rest of my life. And I think sometimes we almost get stigmatized by that question of why. Why would you want to? It actually sounds like kind of a rude question when you think about it. It's very mundane, but it can be perceived as a little bit rude. And so it causes us to not do that path that we were thinking about and to just continue on the one that we were on. And I think we actively have to fight against that every day. And I really encourage people to ask the question, okay, how? So this is what you want. How are you going to do that? I think that's just a better question.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point for sure. When you handed off that resume, did you expect that you would get a call back? And talk to me about what happened after that. How did you get your first contact from them?
Oh, I definitely didn't really think anyone would call. I have to be completely honest with you, Jennifer. I actually forgot about it. If you want me to be completely honest, I gave them my resume and then I just continued on my bike to my astronomy class. It was really that simple. I think a lot of times too, people actually steer away from these careers because they don't think they're quote qualified. Well, what does that even look like? What boxes are you even checking? And so I always like to encourage people just apply. The worst anyone's ever going to say to you is no, right? And the best they're ever going to say is yes. So don't make that decision for them by just not applying at all. And so, yeah, I gave them my resume. I kind of forgot that I had applied until they called my room, and my roommate actually picked up the phone. And she's fantastic, but she was valedictorian of the college. I mean, she's a wonderful person, but she actually hung up on them when they called the first time because I think she thought it was kind of a joke, which I can completely see that. I wasn't upset with her at all. In fact, I was like, what they're calling? I mean, I get it. And so they called back and I answered the phone at that point. And so that would have been spring of my junior year in college. So I was only 20 at that point. And where I'm from in California, you actually start kindergarten at 4. So I was very, very young, always for my grade, if that makes any sense. And so I was only 20. And so you then, if they call, you go for an interview. And that interview was kind of in a big ballroom in a hotel in downtown LA. It was like a cattle call sort of a situation. I don't know that I thought too much about it. I happened to be very sick that day to the point that there was a trash can next to me. Um, while I was doing the interview, I'm sorry, I don't mean to like gross people out, but I actually I'd gotten the stomach flu, and I was very sick. And
Mhm.
they ask you substantive questions, obviously, about the world, which I mean, you should have that information. And then they ask for writing samples and those kinds of things. So I think that's sort of a initial vetting process, right? Where they're making kind of their, I guess, largest cuts, if you will, at that point. Once you pass that, then you are invited to, I would say, a much more rigorous, interview process slash somewhat of a background check. And that's when they fly you to Virginia. And so I was only 20. And so my mom came with me. Um, and I know that sounds silly, but she came with me. And that's where I did, the physical, some very rigorous, like mental testing, puzzle testing, logic testing, like that kind of stuff. And then the dreaded polygraph test, which my first one came back as inconclusive, but then I passed the second one. And then from there, once you quote pass, then they begin your background check. And so that's when they came. I think it would have kind of started in August of moving into my senior year. And I officially cleared in November of 99. So that would have been fall of my senior year of college. And I had just turned 21 like 2 weeks before that. So, but it was conditional upon my graduation from college, obviously.
So exciting and funny. I That was also when I was in school, and that's when I got my first job offer. I think it was in
Yeah.
November of 99. And so yeah, so I can relate to that. Slightly different
Yeah.
job paths we took, but
Well, you know what
um,
it's like getting your first job offer, regardless of what it is, right?
yeah.
It's a big deal.
Well, and to your point, I think about mine and I was like, oh, well, for me, it was not a job that I was looking for. It wasn't a job that I went to school to do. And I always tell young people to just really be open minded
Yes.
and don't pass up opportunities that interest you, even if they weren't what you thought you were going to do, because I really wasn't going to do that job. And it opened up this completely new world to me that I never thought I would get to do. I think I'm finally in the job I thought I would do someday, but it took me a really long time to get here. And so I can kind of relate to you, thought, on that point. So it's, yeah, stay open-minded. But talk to me a little bit about that first chapter with the CIA. I mean, what a first job and what a way to just get into the real world fast. I mean, I feel like listening to your story, I thought, wow, you had to grow up really fast, and you saw a lot of hard things in those early years of your life. So talk to me about that path, how it evolved, and how you navigated it.
So yeah, obviously, I graduated in May of 2000, and then I started at CIA, gosh, about probably 2 weeks after that or so. We got to have time to move, do all the things, and pack. Um, at CIA, contrary to what people think for most government jobs, quite frankly, you don't go in and say, "This is where I want to work. This is what I want to do, and this is how I'm going to do it." They sort of put you where the need is, if that makes sense. And I got very, very lucky in that I wanted to work counterterrorism, and that's actually the division that I was placed in. I would say the folks with a lot of experience in the agency were very much either in the Russia branch or kind of the Latin America counter narcotics, just because, and again, you probably know the time period too, the 90s was very much a time of Russia and just a lot of coup d'etats in South America, and that was the hiring focus. And so the focus wasn't CT, but I was so excited to be there. So I was put into the operations side. I wasn't an analyst. I was actually very unqualified to be an analyst. Most of them have PhDs in very specific subject matters. And speak another language. I did not speak another language at the time. Again, their hiring focus for language was Russian and Spanish. So I don't speak either. So it is what it is. You just get hired. And I was just very excited. My initial job, at CIA, you don't go to training right away. That's more the FBI. I was really looking at terrorist training camps, particularly ones that were in Afghanistan. Who's coming? Who's going? Are there waves of people going in and out? Are they expanding? Kind of all those kinds of things to gather as much intelligence as possible in terms of what was going on there.
So neat. I was thinking about one of the things that you were in a very male dominated field. And so I don't want to compare like my career path to yours from that standpoint, but I do know what it's like to be young. Not only, was I a female, but I was really young and I was in an industry that was primarily older men. And I really could relate to that about your story. And at times I felt like I really had to be very defensive about my strengths and abilities. And as I've gotten older, I've come to realize that, it's a good thing that women and men sometimes think a little bit differently. There's a lot of synergies to be had by the combined strength of working together. And, whether it's my marriage with my husband, and the things he's good at versus what I'm good at, to even like I think about our swine industry, and there are women really dominating in certain areas of the swine industry because of their strengths as nurturers. We see a lot of women in farrowing and nursery stages. So um I was just thinking about kind of that angle of how did you lean into your strengths as a woman in the CIA?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's interesting because I feel like I don't want to say lucky. My bosses were men. The counterterrorism center at that time was really full of women. But when September 11th happened, they brought over a lot of people from the Russia division who happened to all be men. However, they were wonderful and incredible advocates for us. And it was almost like, you ladies are the experts. We're just kind of here. And so, they would kind of step aside, I guess. But it was interesting. I was reading an article a couple years ago, and it was from the head of I would argue, the most aggressive, preeminent intelligence service probably in the world. And he was making the case as to why women make better spies. And he said it was all about what he calls soft skills. So critical thinking, empathy, decision making skills, listening abilities were different than those of men. It doesn't make us better. It doesn't make us worse. But sometimes, like you mentioned, having two people that think differently and approach a situation differently, in my opinion, is actually a really good thing.
I found that I'm like, sometimes it's easier to work with people who are different than you because, like you can kind of meet in the middle on things and you're not kind of arguing on the same side. Or I don't know. I've really enjoyed being able um, to work with men over the years in my career just because it helped me gain a different perspective that I didn't have. And I would even say that about the age thing too, being younger, working with older people. Now I feel like I'm approaching that older side of things. So I'm moving on up. So I'm not the young kid anymore, but there's a lot of lessons that you learn during those early years. What do you think was one of the most important lessons that you learned in those first few years of your career?
I think growing up as a kid in Southern California, my dad was a professor. We certainly weren't, millionaires by any stretch, but I never knew what the world in dire straits sort of looked like. And so I think for me, particularly serving a tour in Afghanistan, I think I thought when I came face to face with a terrorist and talked to them, most of them speak English, by the way. My first question to him, is why'd you become a terrorist? And I thought I knew that he was radical, all the things. And it really changed my perspective, what he told me. I'm certainly like not absolving him of his behavior. He is a terrorist. He has killed people. But it really changed my perspective because that's not a country that I grew up in. And so talking to him about why he became a terrorist, I would argue is a very pivotal moment for me because, he said he grew up in a country that I think today we would label as a fragile or a failed state, meaning they're not meeting the needs of their people, right? There's no healthcare, maybe no paved roads, not a good financial system, just basic infrastructure wasn't there. He had been orphaned at age of 7, had completely unchecked hepatitis, was living in a storm drain, and a member of Al Qaeda found him on the streets, and a member of Al Qaeda offered him food, clothing, shelter, medicine. And so as a result, this individual felt very beholden to them. And that's why he became a member of Al Qaeda. And for me, that was life changing because that was a life that I never, ever knew or ever came close to knowing. And it really helped us really identify for the president, it was President Bush at the time, how to sort of stop this threat really from the ground up rather from the top down.
It's really interesting. And again, an example of where your empathy skills can really come play, being able to try to like understand where they came from to be able to figure out where you go from there, right? I can only imagine that you had to absorb a lot of questions and a lot of different paths in your mind as you were in that counterterrorism unit. Do you think it's possible to get too deep into the planning and asking of questions? You've hinted at that a little bit, but talk to us about why or why not you think that to be true.
Sometimes I don't think it's good, and I'm sure people will be upset at me for saying this, to overthink things. Because sometimes you just need to do it. Like you just need to, because sometimes asking questions becomes like this crutch for us, right? To like not do the thing. I'm not saying we should be careless or reckless, right? And not research things before we do them. But I also think at the same time, you can only plan for so much. You can only ask questions for so much before you just need to get into it and do it. And a lot of CIA is reactionary. I'm not saying that's a good thing, right? But it is. So it's based on the situation that has arisen right at that moment in time, and you don't have the opportunity to ask questions.
So obviously you had a lot of really great experiences in the CIA. It was a very life-changing experience. How did you get to the next chapter of going to the FBI? Talk about that transition.
Yeah. So, in all honesty, I was just tired of being overseas. I wish I had a sexier answer than that. But I was sick of being overseas. I loved the CIA. My friends from there were bridesmaids at my wedding. I'm so close to people from there. There wasn't any ill will or, this like reason that I left. I was obviously still very passionate about the CT mission. I didn't want to be overseas. I wanted to be stationary. I wanted to be in the United States. And so I felt that the best way to do that, still work this counterterrorism mission, was to become an FBI agent. And so that's why I left, and that's why I did what I did.
What were some of the things like how would you describe your job at the FBI? I know you can't share all the details, but what were some of the things that you did for the FBI during that time period?
So I became a special agent. Obviously, I went to Quantico well, at the time it was 17 weeks. I have no idea how long it is now. So I went to Quantico, and then I was sent to the LA field office, but the Santa Ana resident agency. So resident agencies are much smaller, sort of satellite offices, with just less agents in them. So what's kind of cool, I guess, is that you kind of get to do everything, even though you are obviously assigned to like a singular squad. And so I was assigned to what's called the CI, or Counterintelligence Squad. So I was working the very first Chinese economic espionage case here in the United States. And so, we were following an individual who was a naturalized citizen, had been in the US a little under 30 years, and had given a whole bunch of secrets that through the company he was working for to back to the Chinese government. And so we followed him. We got a surreptitious entry warrant, which means we were able to break into his home when he wasn't there, which I guess that was kind of fun, if you will. And so that was really the focus of my investigation. But I obviously got to help out a lot, especially where I was working, which was Orange County, California, a lot of white collar crime and healthcare fraud, big arrests, plastic surgery fraud, those kinds of things. Also, kind of to what we were discussing before, it's not female heavy. And so when you go on arrests, if there's going to be a female, typically you always try to bring female agents with you. So you kind of get picked to go on different arrests, seizing things. I got to drive a Lamborghini back to the office once that we had seized from someone. So, fun things like that.
Were you scared? Was it a scary job? I mean, I'm like, wow, it seems like all this danger that you were in. Did you feel scared at the time, or was it just like,
Okay, so this is an age issue. um, in your 20s, I think you feel invincible. I don't know if you feel that way, but I know I felt that way. And so, like, I never understood. I mean, I understood that the behavior was risky. I'm not stupid, obviously, but I think I felt invincible. At 47, now I don't feel that way, right? And I see the risks involved in what I was doing. But at the time, no, I don't remember ever feeling scared. There was really just one time at the CIA when I felt like, ooh, I don't know how this is going to like pan out for me. But no. And I think some of that I've had time to reflect is like truly an age thing, which you just can't really replicate.
That's a good point. I mean, I can't really relate to being in situations like you, so I'm not really sure that I ever felt like that exactly. But I do see your point of like how age gives us perspective, and the more
100%.
we know about the world around us, the more our fears can either in some ways subside or in sometimes escalate.
Yes.
Um, you're at this point that you still haven't done what you always thought you would do, which was become a teacher. So how on earth did you make the leap from CIA, FBI, and now you're going to go do what you always thought you'd want to do? What preempted that to happen for you?
Yeah. So at the CIA, I think I mentioned I was the only female a lot of times. I had like zero issues being the only female multiple times, like no issues. Men were amazing. The FBI was like a very different story. I think because we look at the gathering of intelligence as a bit more female. Also, women had been integrated into the CIA since about the 1960s, whereas at the FBI, women were actually not allowed to be special agents until the 1970s. And so that's obviously an issue. Also, I think we associate law enforcement, so like breaking down doors, arresting people, those kinds of things is like a very male um, dominated career. And so the amount of struggles that I had being the only female was just like not pleasant for me. And unfortunately, at the time, the FBI had no way to report or communicate any of that. And it's interesting. I actually almost didn't put that I was an FBI agent in my book. So I guess it's like a fun fact I'm giving you all here today, because it's really painful to sort of talk about what happened. But I received an email, I don't remember the years, maybe 5 or 6 years ago while I was writing the book, from an individual. She was Air Force, and she had gone through Quantico. And it was a link, it was a New York Times article to a 19-woman gender discrimination lawsuit at the FBI from Quantico. And the head of Quantico at the time was an individual who made my life miserable when I was at Quantico. He was an agent with me. And so I thought that that was very interesting. I did not join their lawsuit. All of them did not graduate from Quantico. I did. And it's actually since settled September of 2024. It's the largest gender discrimination lawsuit ever against a federal agency. And so that's when I realized I need to put this in the book because I have to like bring attention and awareness to this. And I started to realize, okay, how can I change this like dynamic, this narrative? And I realized education is the best way to do that. And so I left and I got my master's in education and I became a high school history teacher with my teacher supervisor was the very same teacher who inspired me to become a teacher. So I ended up teaching at that same school.
Oh, that's so neat. I
Yeah.
didn't realize that. That's so cool.
Yeah.
Well, I've never been a teacher. I admit I thought I wanted to be a teacher when I was a kid. But one of the things that I've done is I feel like in my career, I've found ways to be able to pass on information and share my passions with other people. So whether that's as a mom or as a coach of a 4-H livestock judging team, or even as a writer, in my former job working and building a national youth organization, I think if you ask anybody, I'm a person who really loves young people and I love trying to help connect people to their future careers. Um, it just gets me pretty excited and passionate because there's so many like great opportunities, right? And so I get excited about that. As a teacher, how do you feel called to pour into young people, and what are the things that make you so passionate about teaching that
So
next generation?
so I started out actually teaching high school, and then I created a class on national security, foreign policy, and law enforcement just for girls, to try to get them into these careers. But I've now since moved on. I teach college. I teach criminal justice in college. And since then, I've had students who now, they go to CIA career fairs, they go to FBI career fairs. And I think the issue is I know I talked about at the beginning, I didn't even know how to have a job in these fields. And so just even exposing women and men to these careers actually empowers them to seek them out. And also sharing with them, I think there's a misconception that there's all these boxes that you need to check before you could even apply. And nothing could really be further from the truth. And I think it makes a lot of people shy away from these jobs. So I have always felt a lot of times we always talk about this like top down approach to change, but I actually think it needs to start from a bottom up and be a little bit more organic, I guess. But I also think too, because now I'm the national security contributor for News Nation, and I'm the only former CIA officer who's doing that. And I know this sounds silly and superficial, but like representation does matter. And so when people see a female who's had the experience I have talking on these issues, we start to like normalize it a little bit more, particularly on TV.
Yeah, for sure. And one of the things that I also think to be true, and I see this how that's played out in your life as well. You didn't really even know what the opportunities were, and two of the three jobs that I've had did not exist when I was in college. Like they were jobs that were created later, and quite honestly, they were jobs that were created because it was like, okay, she's the right fit. I'm not exactly sure how we're going to make this work, but we're going to create a job and we're going to turn it into who she is. I always thought a job had to be like, to your point, you go check the boxes. That's the job on the board. But I think that things are different now. And I think there's more and more companies that are realizing it's about getting the right people in, and then we mold the job to them. How do you see that with the young people that you're working with and the types of jobs that they're going out and getting?
I totally agree with you. I couldn't agree with you more. Sometimes it's frustrating because I spend a lot of time as a teacher. I was just mentoring one student who she is going through the interview process right now at the CIA. I think that may have been put on pause. I don't know. She wasn't even going to give them her resume. And I literally deal with this all the time because she's like, well, I don't speak a foreign language. I didn't major in international affairs. I didn't this. And that is my biggest battle. Like literally every day, that is my biggest battle. And it is so frustrating because I share my story. It's almost like they don't believe me that could actually happen. And sure enough, she's made it through the fourth round, of interviews at this point. She is not an international affairs major. She does not have another language, but she texted me. This was about a month ago. She's like, I totally believe you now. I definitely believe that you don't have to have all this. And so that is really the hardest thing is like breaking that down because kids for some reason really want like this box that they can check to like obtain these jobs. I don't know if it's because of social media and like what they see. I really don't know where that comes from, but I actually feel like there's more of that now and less of that when I was a kid.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I don't know if it's just the basics of our school system and how kids learn, but I think that's why it's so important. And I'm so convicted that tell as many people as you can, like, don't limit yourself and don't put yourself in a box, and be okay with who you are and what your unique skill sets are that you bring to the table. And who knows, it just might be what somebody needs that they don't even know they're looking for, And
Mhm.
so to build on that just a little bit, what do you enjoy the most about what you do? What drives you every day today in your job?
I mean, I think seeing students, right, going through the process, right, of, joining the CIA, joining the FBI. And I know this sounds silly, especially being older now at my age. I did develop a larger social media following on my Instagram account, my public Instagram. I have personal, but my public, because I view that as educational as well. And I'm really, really proud of the fact that I'm able to deliver information on national security, on law enforcement in a very apolitical way. That's something I'm super passionate about because we just need to know what's going on. And if we know what's going on, then we can start to form opinions, right, and actions on that. And so I'm really proud of that work that I'm doing with, my students and in terms of like getting information out there and working with News Nation too.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground, and I know that your time is limited, but I want to ask you one more thing. If you
Sure.
had just a few minutes to share one of the most important messages on your mind right now, what would you leave us with? What do you think is something that you hope people can take away, whether it's from your book, whether it's from your current role and what your outreach now, or things you've learned in life? I guess, what do you think is one of the most important messages that you feel that you have to share?
I think the biggest thing is what I tell my students, both high school, when I taught high school, and now obviously college at college. Don't tell yourself no. We so many times are, oh, I'm not going to submit that resume because I'm not qualified. Well, how do you know you're not qualified? You, in my opinion, are your biggest obstacle in terms of not being able to pursue this career path that you want to pursue. So don't be the one to tell yourself no. Someone else can tell you that. But the best outcome is always yes. And you're never going to get the yes if you don't even try.
Oh, that's so good. And I think, there's a diverse group of people who listen to this podcast. And I don't think it matters what age you are. That's a message that we all can benefit from. And I just want to say thank you so much for joining us today. You can dive into more of the Pork Podcast on Farm Journal's YouTube channel, or you can listen to it anywhere that podcasts are found. Again, this is Jennifer Scheich, finding the story behind the story.